In this video, I continue looking at appeal decisions where the original structure should be identified before applying the permitted development limitations. This property is located at the eastern end of a terrace running east-west. The appellant applied for a lawful development certificate, an LDC, to build an extension to the south-facing elevation. The council refused the application. Under A1E, development is not permitted if the enlarged part of the dwelling house would extend beyond a wall which forms the principal elevation of the original dwelling house. The council considered the principal elevation to be the south-facing elevation, and the proposed structure would be therefore situated forward of the principal elevation. This is what the inspector had to say. The red brick property has an L-shaped footprint, giving the wider south elevation a more imposing presence. Each of the three elevations display architectural features consistent with the Edwardian era, including canted bays with stone surrounds, timber detailing, and clay tile hangings. The north-facing elevation is dominated by a gabled rear addition and includes what appears to be a secondary access door. This elevation lacks the formality of the south-facing elevation. The east-facing elevation comprises a side gable with a bay window. Although the main entrance to the property is within this elevation, its form and features are not consistent with a principal elevation. The south-facing elevation contains a two-story canted bay window and a dormer window. While it does not contain an entrance, this elevation retains the formal appearance and design features of the principal elevation. The inspector agreed with the council that the structure would be situated on land forward of a wall forming the principal elevation of the original dwelling house, and the appeal was dismissed. My big problem with this appeal decision is that there is no sign that the inspector has attempted to discover the form of the original dwelling house, and thereafter the principal elevation thereof. I believe this should have been done, as there appears sufficient evidence that the building has changed since it was originally constructed. This is a detached property with a swimming pool located to the south and east of the building. The appellant applied for an LDC to erect a pool building to enclose the pool. The council rejected the application. Under E1C, development is not permitted if any part of the building would be situated on land forward of a wall forming the principal elevation of the original dwelling house. The council considered the principal elevation to be the south-facing elevation, and the proposed pool building would be sited forward of the principal elevation. Upon appeal, the inspector considered that the south-facing elevation had a symmetrical appearance and contained main architectural features, including two large bay windows at ground floor and first floor window under a gable roof. This elevation also faced the main highway serving the property. The appellant claimed that the western elevation was the principal elevation, because the original front door was in that elevation. Drawings for a previous permission supported this claim. Notwithstanding this item, the inspector found that the west elevation did not contain any main architectural features, nor did it front a main highway, and the inspector concluded that the south elevation was the principal elevation, and the appeal thus failed. In my opinion, this assessment of the principal elevation appears to fall short of being complete and rigorous. I would have expected an attempt to discern the design of the original dwelling house, with questions asked of the age of the south-facing bay windows. If they were not in existence when the original building was constructed, the south-facing elevation will not have the current impact and so might not deserve the title of principal elevation. There's no mention of the attributes of the west elevation that might sway opinion in deciding the principal elevation. For example, The porch and the parking area are on the west elevation, providing essential pedestrian and vehicle access. First-time visitors would approach the property on the road from the west, and they would seek the entrance on the west-facing elevation. None of this was mentioned. Unfortunately, I can't see the west elevation, and so I'm not able to assess its architectural value. If the attributes of the competing elevations had been assessed fairly and completely, I believe that a more balanced conclusion could have been reached. Perhaps even an allowance of the appeal. This property is a detached house inside a tightly curved highway. The two elevations facing the main highway are north-facing, containing the double garage, and east-facing, incorporating the main entrance door. The appellant applied for an LDC to put a detached garage next to the existing garage. The council rejected the application on the basis that the garage would be sited forward of the principal elevation, deemed to be the east-facing elevation. Upon appeal, the inspector found that both elevations had comparable fenestration and both had entrances. The impact of the east elevation was diminished by its distance from the facing road, and the impact of the north elevation was enhanced by its wider two-story element and due to it directly fronting the highway. The inspector concluded the north elevation was the principal elevation and that the appeal should be allowed. My major problem with this appeal decision is that the inspector failed to consider the original dwelling house and only considered the current dwelling house. Although it's a relatively new build, there is evidence that extensions, including the upper story over the garage, have been added, and that the front entrance has been moved from its original elevation. This should have prompted an inquiry into the form of the original dwelling house. If the principal elevation of the original dwelling house turned out to be the east elevation, the appeal would have been dismissed instead of being allowed. The fourth and final case is where the appellant applied for an LDC to put a swimming pool in the southeast corner of the garden. The council rejected the application as the pool building would be sited forward of the principal elevation, deemed to be the south-facing elevation. I don't usually include excerpts from the council report, but I was impressed by the case officer's assessment of the property in deciding the principal elevation, so I've summarised it here. The northern elevation is relatively plain and utilitarian in appearance and is not considered to be the original principal elevation. The south-facing original elevation appears to have contained the main architectural details one would normally expect on the main aspect of a building. There is a feature bay window, stone detailing to the upper floor, and prior to the erection of the large sunroom, the front door into the entry hall was accessed through the southern elevation, which had detailing within, including stained glass features over the original front door and the side light. Furthermore, given the age and scale of the property, the sweeping driveway from the road would have led around the side of the dwelling to the front elevation of the dwelling. As such, it is reasonable to conclude that the original principal elevation was the southern elevation. This is supported by evidence uncovered during a planning history search for the site. So what did the inspector say? The inspector referred to some of the above comments without disagreement and added, "The significant architectural detail and design of the south facade is not apparent on the other elevations. Habitable rooms are located on the southern side of the property, taking account of the views and natural light and openings. The southern elevation is clearly aesthetically important, and in my view, the original orientation of the property was deliberately designed towards the south to take advantage of the views, extensive garden, and natural sunlight." All of these comments supported the southern elevation as the principal elevation. The inspector continued, "Taking into account the layout of the drive outbuildings and access from Barnsley Road, it seems to me that people would have generally entered the building from the northern elevation. I was a little taken aback at that conclusion. Why take into account the current layout of the drive, the current outbuildings and the current access from the main highway, in order to assess where the main entrance of the original building was located? Why not give some weight to the historic plans indicating the drive would have led around to the south of the building? Why say the front is south-facing, and then conclude people generally entered this impressive building from the back door? Why say, I do not consider that the south facade contained the main entrance to the original building, and then present no evidence for the conclusion that the main entrance to the original dwelling was anywhere but the south facade? All of the evidence, south-facing, planning history, original front door, stained glass, main windows and other architectural features, pointed to the south as the front of the original building and as the principal elevation. However, the inspector concluded that the swimming pool was not forward of the principal elevation and thus allowed the appeal. I've got to say that I'm disappointed with the quality of these 4 assessments. As a baseline, I expect a balanced assessment of the competing elevations, and I expect the inspectors to consider the original dwelling house. What do you think? If you'd like to support this YouTube channel, please press like or subscribe. Next week, I'm looking at more appeal decisions where the original structure needs to be identified. Thanks for watching. See you next week.